Good morning. Morning, Eric. Good morning, Jenny. Thanks for coming in on time. Who is that? Raymond over there? That's Keller
Morning, Mark.
Valley. Good morning, Raymond. Thanks for launching. Morning, Eric. We'll let everyone filter in here. Just want to make sure I turn off the silly waiting rooms. Let's get everybody in. While that goes in, I will fire up the old contract. You guys have any questions or concerns or issues from our previous session yesterday that you'd like me to address before we start? Close, brother. All right, Eric asks, would you recommend a deposit on a home condo that's been on market? Seems like it wouldn't affect the offer to my knowledge, or on market a while. Well, yes, I would recommend a deposit. There should always be an earnest money deposit to keep the property off the market for the benefit of the buyer. If I received an offer that had no deposit, I would not assume that the buyer is serious. So it would be an uphill road to get it accepted. Now, do you have to put in a full 3%? No. But you should put in something. At least 1%. What's the reason that you wouldn't put a deposit in? Does the client not have any cash? And if they don't have cash now, how will they miraculously get enough cash to close escrow when it's time? My question. You know, as things stay on the market a little longer, you will have some more negotiating power. So although you put that earnest money in, you know, liquidated damages will limit the damages if the buyer cancels to just that deposit. That's all the seller can keep. So if you have nothing, then there's nothing holding the seller. Right. All right, guys, so you guys are clear on the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. We're clear on the fair housing advisory, the PR, possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, the PRBS, wire fraud advisory. That one's an easy one. And then this lovely part 3 of our purchase agreement. Just the other thing of advice I could give, guys, make sure you don't leave any check boxes unchecked. So seller's brokerage, make sure you check whoever that seller is, that they're representing the seller and then the buyer appropriately. Would hate for someone to not try to pay you on a little technicality. It's like, my name's on there, yeah, but it doesn't check you as the buyer's agent. Doesn't check either. Right? Those boxes are there, make sure they're checked appropriately to protect yourself and your clients. Never make any assumptions, guys. If there's ever, and when everything goes smoothly, right? Sometimes the small mistakes will get overlooked and the deal will close and everyone will go their separate ways happy. But when there's ever a little dispute or some kind of inconsistency, then they start looking for technicalities and then they'll start criticizing your box checking. It's silly, I know it, and it sounds even silly for me to say it, but it is what it is. You know, if one of your value propositions is your attention to detail, make sure your attention to those little details and make sure that you're checking all the right boxes. All right, so no questions on this first part of this, the chart here, paragraph 3. I think we got through, correct me if
Mark?
I'm wrong. Yes.
Mark, can you cover more on the appraisal contingency?
Let's see here.
Before we don't, yes, zero contingency. Now is to think about putting some contingencies on the offer, right? So
Sure.
there's like a appraisal, like percentage, like what is the best way to put this? Like there is a checkbox, a dollar amount, or can you put like okay, so if it's appraisal below like a certain percentage of the price, right? It will cancel. So
Well,
what should we put here?
well, which way is the market going, you think, right now?
The market is going down, right?
Let's go from today moving forward. Where do we think the market's going right now?
It's going down.
Right. Are people going to be pushing the limits of appraisal? Or do you think that they'll be conservative, looking for opportunities and deals? Because if people are looking for opportunities and deals, right, they're probably making deals under what we would think, or right at or under where we would conceive market value to be. So if that's the case, there's no reason to check the box in item 8B for appraisal contingency to go over the price.
Yeah, that was before. Okay, so
that was before.
In the hot market.
But the market will shift again, so it's important to know this part of the contract.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. Need to know when to use. Yeah, when is the proper way to use this.
Also strategically, guys, think about it. If you're asking somebody to lower the price and make give you a win on the price, where are you gonna maybe make a sacrifice to make the offer look more appealing, right? So if the most important thing is to get the better price, and we already know that this price is going to be, it's going to be within the line of appraisal, then why would you even bother with having an appraisal contingency? That makes your offer look weaker, right? If you have a low offer with a lot of contingencies and a lot of outs, it makes it more challenging for the seller to come around and give you a deal on the price. Whereas if you say, okay, Mr. Seller, unfortunately, I can't give you the price that you want. You're gonna have to take a discount. However, we're confident in our ability to buy. We're completely pre-approved, so we're not gonna have any loan or appraisal contingencies, and we're comfortable with the condition of the house. So, I mean, it's a good leverage to remove the contingencies if you're really trying to go for that low price. Because at least then the seller goes, yeah, I'll take a low price, but I'm going to be closed in 3 weeks and be done. Right? But if you're going low price plus contingencies plus everything else, I mean, the listing agent's really going to be doing his very, very best to get you beat.
Mhm.
And we're not quite there to where we're dead. So there is a good chance that, knowing that one offer came in, if the listing agent's diligent in making his calls, that he'll be able to generate a subsequent offer to beat you pretty quick.
Mhm.
So we don't want to make offers that help other people buy homes, right? We want to make offers to help our clients buy homes.
Okay.
So yesterday we did review the loan contingencies, correct?
Mhm.
I think we got down to the verification of condition. Yeah.
Yes.
The verification of condition is an important document, often overlooked, unfortunately, but it's what solidifies the condition of the property. Now, it's not a contingency. What we're doing with the final verification of condition is just verifying that the property is in the same condition it was when the offer was made. And if there was any repairs that were negotiated as part of the contract, that those repairs have been completed. Now, the majority of these deals these days don't have any repairs, right? We're not asking the seller to make repairs. Most of them are as is. So there really isn't much to do with this final verification of condition other than verify that everything still works. Now, what if something doesn't? Is this a contingency? Can we hold up the closing of escrow for something that was broken that shouldn't have been broken? And the real answer to that is no. No. But you do not lose the right to get that condition resolved by the seller, because ultimately it was their responsibility to maintain the property. So this kind of goes hand in hand with that transfer disclosure statement. If you look on the transfer disclosure statement and it says that, oh, everything works on the transfer disclosure statement, and then you're doing your final verification and you realize, oh, look, the oven's not turning on. Something's wrong there, right? The seller technically owes you a working oven. So you can still close escrow and continue the transaction and then seek remedy from the seller because they are in actual violation of the contract. Part 3K is an assignment request. And it's interesting because I had an agent call me with a question regarding an offer that came in from an investor that in the actual, where it says who the buyer is, it said blah, 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 or assignee. This is, in my opinion, a slight red flag that you may be dealing with a wholesaler. Just make sure that they don't have heavy contingencies, because chances are they may back out on those. The reason for the assignment is many times people make their offer to buy the property in their name, then they consult with a CPA, they consult with an attorney possibly, and realize it's in their best interest to actually take the property in a trust. So then they assign the contract from themselves as the buyer to their trust. That way they don't have to re-sign anything or anything like that because they're still the actual physical buyer. But this way that the title company can make sure that they're taking title in the manner that they see that's best for them. Okay. Now we just briefly touched on loan and appraisal contingencies. By default, it's 17 days. If you want to do it shorter to make your offer look stronger, you can. Of course, always verify with your lender to make sure that the timeline is realistic. If the lender says I need 17 days, don't write anything shorter, because at that moment, the listing side can send you the notice to perform. And if they're not ready, then your client either has to take a risk or risk getting kicked out of contract. In a declining market, that risk isn't quite as strong, but when the market's shifting and going in the other direction, Believe me, there's desperate buyers that'll be calling the pendings and say, hey, is your deal going to close or is it going to fall through? And if there's any waiver, they go, well, we'll give you 20 grand more than you have if you don't go back on the market and you force this buyer out, which means they'll send you the notice to perform and kick you out of contract. Make sure that you can realistically adhere to the timelines that you specify in the contract. 17 days is a long time. I think it's appropriate for 17 days if the borrower had not been properly pre-approved. Then yeah, it might take that long. But realistically, if your borrower has been properly pre-approved through underwriting, then you should be able to get the contingency removed or even forego the contingency altogether if you want to make your offer look stronger. The appraisal section, guys, we're evaluating property value is what we do as a kind of our living. So you guys should have a very clear understanding whether we're easily in range of appraising, or if the dollar amount is going to be questionable, you might not appraise. If it's an easy, yes, it should appraise, then you can take the risk without the contingency. But if you are pushing the boundaries and your clients are not comfortable offering more or closing on a higher dollar amount than what can be appraised at, then you need to have this contingency. Investigation of property contingency also, if you don't have a clear picture of the condition of the property, you should have the investigation of property contingency, especially if your clients want to run different inspections. In most cases in Silicon Valley, San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, Alameda County even, you're going to get a gamut of inspections from the selling side. So you should have a very clear picture as to the condition of the property. Now, whether you trust those inspectors or not, that's up to you and your buyer. But the buyer will go ahead and make that decision if they want to do more inspections. If they do, you can have that contingency. Now, if you're aggressive and you don't have it, you put it at 0, you still have the right to access the property, even though you don't have a contingency, right? The contingency only prevents the buyer from losing their deposit. If, for example, you put on a very minimal deposit, maybe $3,000 or $4,000, maybe $2,000 with no contingency, and then you come to find out, oh, the property's got all kinds of problems and the seller's not willing to negotiate, well, maybe it's better to walk away from that $2,000. Easy to walk away from 2,000 than it is from 20 or 40 or 60 or 80, of course, right? Which is why the seller would like that deposit up at 3%. Right, contingency to review the seller documents. Again, in most cases, we're going to get those documents up front. So you'll review them most likely before you even make the offer. However, if you don't, or if the seller would like more time, the buyer would like more time, you can ask for the contingency to review those documents. If you don't have those documents, you should not remove contingencies, period. Because in this contract, I think this is actually where we ended. Paragraph 8H in the contract deeper in will specify that, hey, if you remove contingencies without seeing the documents, you're taking all the liability and the risk for whatever those documents say. They don't protect you. You don't get an extra 3 days to then cancel and still expect your deposit back. By removing those contingencies, you forego those rights. That's clearly written in paragraph 8H. Common interest disclosures also, if there's a HOA or CCNRs, want to make sure that you have adequate time to review those and the buyer feels comfortable with the rules of the association, right? They may be snake breeders and there may be rules in the association that don't allow more than 1 pet or more than 2 pets, or they don't allow exotic pets. Some do say that. So make sure that the seller or the buyer is comfortable with those rules and regulations. The second thing the buyer needs to ultimately be comfortable with is the financial condition of the homeowners association. And that's somewhere where we kind of help guide in a way, but common sense prevails in many cases. Right? If you're looking at an old condominium complex that looks like they have a lot of deferred maintenance, and if you're looking at their budget and financials and they have very little money, then understand that more than likely there will be special assessments, or that assessments, whatever the assessment is, will likely rise short term.
Mark, can I ask a
Yes.
question?
Absolutely, anytime.
Since you are talking about HOA, so what percent of reserve is should be expected? Because when I look at all these documents, some have very low reserve and some have very high reserve. So based on your experience, what percentage will be a good ballpark?
You know, I can't really answer that question because it's going to be a very diverse depending on every situation, because every HOA is different. What I was going to say is it has to make sense. If they have low reserves, but then you look at the property and everything looks to be pristine, like they just repainted everything and they, you know, just put on new roofs on the whole complex, and the balconies look great and, you know, recently painted, so that it's obvious that the HOA invested a considerable amount of money in maintenance recently, then I would say it's okay for their reserves to be a little low. But if you look at the property and you see that, oh man, the paint's chipping away everywhere, and you know that you look at the railings and it looks like there's a ton of termite damage left and right, and then you look at the budget and reserves and there's no money, then you know that there's a problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Problems.
Yep, good
So
point.
It's the full picture.
All right, thanks.
Also, review of leased or liened items. See if there's any solar panels, propane tanks, things of that nature that will affect or could affect even the buyer's qualification. They may be subject to those leases and have to take them over. Or in some cases, the seller may have to pay those leases off at close of escrow. And that's very common. 8J is the sale of buyer's property, contingent on the sale of buyer's property. This one we don't see very often, but every now and then we do. Craziest thing of all, last year I had a one-bedroom condo in Daly City that I was selling, and I got two offers, multiple offers. Both of them were contingent upon the buyers, upon the buyers selling their studios. Like 15 years, I haven't had a sale of buyer property contingency, and on the last property I would ever expect to receive offers with such a contingency, I got two of them. And those were my only offers, so what could I do? I had to work with it. Everything worked out at the end. Sometimes people freak out, but nevertheless, if you're on the selling side and you're evaluating someone that has that sale of buyer's property contingency, you have to take a look at what they're doing, take a look at their plan. What is the property, where is the property, and what is the seller's expectation? Where are they going to list it? And how's it going to sell? That's part of your due diligence for your seller. If they're super realistic, it might work out, might be okay. If they're unrealistic, well then you're going to have problems down the road because you're going to be off the market. And even though there is a special status in the MLS to let everyone know that, hey, this is a contingency, you may be able to kick the seller out or the buyer out with a good offer, people still ignore them. So you're not going to get the same action as you would if you were active on the MLS. If people are coming to me with some type of unrealistic contingency for a sale of property, I would encourage them to go ahead and put that property on the market. We'll chat in a couple of weeks if no one else comes through. But I would hesitate to take my listing off the market pending the successful sale of another unrealistic listing. Right. Possession, right? When is the seller or when is the buyer going to take possession of the property? Many cases, if the property is vacant, they'll get possession at close of escrow. If the occupants are the sellers occupying the property, maybe they have a place, they need a place to go. Maybe they don't have a place solidified yet. The seller may require a request to rent back. Now, two key critical timelines on the rent back. Is it going to be 29 days or less, or 30 days or more? Depending on that time, will depend on the forms that you will need to adequately account. If it's 29 days or less, it's a seller in possession form. It's a one-pager, easy. If it's 30 or more days, it's the residential lease after sale. That's a 7-pager. One establishes tenancy, the other one does not. We'll talk about filling out those forms strategically a little bit later on. One thing you do want to make sure you protect your seller or protect your buyer, make sure that you have some type of deposit held back in escrow in the event when the seller moves to damage the property, or in the event the seller does not move out on time. Make sure you have the money tied up to motivate them to get out on time. Tenant occupied units. There is a tenant occupied property addendum. If your buyers are looking to move into this property as their primary residence, I strongly suggest you make sure that those tenants are out prior to close of escrow, at least 5 days before close. If you inherit the tenant from the seller, then it's the buyer's responsibility then to evict the tenant. And that could get sticky and messy. Depending on the type of property, of course, right? If you're dealing with duplexes, fourplexes, or if the buyer is not planning to occupy the property, they're an investor, then obviously you'd like to keep the tenants there. They need to have a form called a tenant estoppel that'll verify the tenant's terms of rental, right? Because landlords wouldn't fabricate a lease or nothing, would they? Buyers are liars, sellers are liars. We have to protect ourselves and our clients from the lies on the other side. One of the ways to do that is the tenant estoppel certificates. Those are basically, they validate the terms of any leases or month-to-month arrangements, how much deposit's there, and how much the rent is. And those are signed by the tenant. That way, when you go to collect rent, they can't come back to you and say, oh no, we had a different lease or the terms were different. No. You have a document signed by you verifying your terms. That way, it's easier for you as when you take possession to hold them to those things. All right, document fees and compliance. Now, when is the seller going to deliver us all the documents? In most cases, in Silicon Valley, you'll get those documents prior to making your offer. And in many cases, those listing agents may even expect you to sign off on all those documents. Right? If you're making your strongest offer and you're signing off on all contingencies and documents, then you can put 0 days. But again, if you're transacting outside of this area, maybe in the Central Valley, where they don't necessarily do pre-listing inspections or documents, simply because they're not expecting to sell the house so quick. Right, guys, don't forget what a balanced market is. Balanced market is 6 months of inventory. Some places, even if you underprice a house, it could take 6 months to get 3 people to come to the front door, right? We're a little spoiled with our demand here in Silicon Valley. So in those cases where maybe a buyer's not expected to come tomorrow, right? Lots of things can happen in 6 months' time. So in many cases, you know, they'll start filling out those documents once their offer is received. How much time to sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions? 5 days after receipt, or again, if you have everything up front, you can do it less. Time to pay fees for ordering HOA documents. Again, we don't want people to drag their feet, especially if you're going to ask the other party to do it. Make sure they're paying for those documents in a timely manner. And then if we can't transact or sell a house that doesn't have smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors, we can't sell a house that's not where the water heater is not braced. Now, there are a couple of documents that are added to these contracts called statements of compliance. If the seller signs those statements of compliance that they have smoke alarms, CO2 detectors, and water heaters braced, they're validating that they are paying for and making sure that these items are going to be there within close of escrow. But there is no law that says the seller has to pay for these things. They can, but there's no law that mandates it. So sometimes the buyer may pay for it. Either way, X number of days after acceptance, those items need to be there. And they need to be there before the appraiser comes through and does his thing. Because the appraiser is looking for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and that water heater bracing. And if those things don't exist, he'll flag it with the bank and they'll hold up your loan. So make sure that those items are there and present for the appraisal process. Right, evidence of representative authority 3 days after acceptance. That's in the event that we're talking about the buyers in a trust or buyers a corporation. Then the buyer, whoever's signing this document, needs to supply proof that they're actually a representative of this company and have the right to sign on their behalf. Any questions so far?
Hey, Mark. Mark, can you explain a little bit more about the sign, the N2 sign return escrow holder provision instructions?
Yeah. If there's any issues with the title that the escrow holder may need the seller to clear, or issues that they need to work through with maybe liens or loans, I believe that to be the case.
Okay. So 5 days is default. Is that enough?
And then, yeah, because they already have the prelim is addressed in a different contingency. Yeah. Should be.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that one will go to, hand in hand with prelim report
Pretty much.
contingency. Okay.
So I'm trying to rack my brain around any other documents that they may require. Sometimes, you know, I offload everything onto my transaction coordinators too. So they handle most of these things for me. So I'm trying to understand if there's anything that I'm missing with that escrow holder provisions. But mainly they're dealing with deposits. So we want to make sure that those are going to be indefinitely within 5 days. Yeah. The other thing might be having to deal with cancellations as well, right? If the buyer is canceling, how fast do we want to make sure that the other side is signing the proper instructions to get their deposits back, things of that nature.
Okay.
So if you're sending in a cancellation within your contingency timeline to the seller, and nobody likes to cancel. The sellers don't like to see those things, so they get hurt, offended, whatever it is they get. What they're supposed to do is sign it quickly and return it, because they're not supposed to. You're not allowed to hold the deposit on off, as much as they like to keep it all. Right. And this will stipulate they have 5 days they better get it. Otherwise, the buyer can, sue them for damages, and it's a losing position. You don't want to be sued, lose, and then have to pay everyone's legal fees on top, especially when you have no chance of winning. All right, items included and excluded. Go back to real estate school. What did they tell you? You take the house, turn it upside down, and shake it. Everything that falls is not real property. Anything that sticks stays, right? Well, there's been some disputes over those types of things, so they clarify with a few check boxes here. Typically, stoves, ovens, and oven combos were real property. If there's a fancy stove or whatever, it's a good idea to check the box just to make sure. Some people have argued, oh, my Viking stove was a freestanding stove, and I just installed your Whirlpool stove as I left. You can't do that. Refrigerators, however, are typically personal property. If there's a nice refrigerator that's sitting in the house, if they're built in, they're built in. But sometimes it's if it works, the buyer wants to keep it, make sure you check the box. Same with wine refrigerators. Washers and dryers also personal property unless you want them. Dishwashers, however, typically are not. And microwaves, again, if they're sitting on top of the counter, they're personal property, but if they're installed above the hood, then they're real property. But, you know, sometimes you get rural properties, things of that nature. Maybe they have a standalone dishwasher. Just to be thorough, good idea to check the box. The security camera equipment is a new thing, and the video doorbells. I would say they should transfer, but if the buyer or seller does not want or wants to keep them for whatever reason, make sure that it's counted out. The wall-mounted brackets for video and audio equipment too is a pretty interesting one too. If you do see, if you're in an occupied property and they have flat screen mounted TVs, what do you want them to do with those brackets? Do you want them to take the brackets out? There might be holes back there, right? How do you work out with those? Above ground pools, spas, bathroom mirrors, unless excluded below or checked. I can imagine, you know, every time there's a line on one of these contracts, there was some dispute or lawsuit that was unclear that resulted in some crazy result. So I guess people were taking the mirrors in their bathrooms, and now we have to clarify to make sure they're included. I did have one case when the seller was a reluctant seller in a divorce situation, and she took everything, like chandeliers and other mounted things. So when my buyers moved in, there was big problems. She brought everything back once everything was properly explained, the consequences of her actions. Everything reappeared at the property miraculously a week later. So everything, everything was resolved, but nevertheless, never assume that people know what is included and not included, and make sure you're counseling your client, letting them know not to take real property. If there's items specifically included that you want them not to leave behind, you can list them in Part 9. Any questions on items included and excluded? Okay. Remember, guys, the full description of everything is further in the contract. So P item 9 is specified in 9B. We'll get to that in a minute. All right. Allocation of costs. Now, this is going to vary depending on customs in the county. Natural hazard, who pays for the natural hazard zone disclosure? In most cases, the seller, because they're going to order it right when they open escrow. So they'll already have it for the buyer as part of the disclosure package. It's $100. If you'd like to order another report in the contract, you can specify it here under Q2 and Q3. I will warn you, however, any report listed here that is supplied, if there's a loan involved, there's an underwriter that may request that report. And it would open up a can of worms you don't need. Most cases, underwriters don't understand what they're reading to begin with. And they'll create problems for you that are unnecessary. If the inspections already came from the other side and you're happy with those inspections, you don't have to list them here. If your buyer wants to pay for their own inspections, again, you don't have to list them here. They have the right to inspect. They have the right to pay for their inspection, whether you list it here or not. Now, if you want the other side to pay for the report, then you would list it here. But again, keep in mind, once you list it here, the underwriter may want to take a look at it. And if they take a look at it and they see some termite issues where you and I and the buyer are okay with, they may not be okay with, and they may require a remediation. Now, who's going to pay for this remediation, right? The seller may not be keen on it. The buyer's like, I don't care about this stuff. I was going to move in and do it next year. Is that right? But not if they disclose it to their underwriter, and their underwriter won't fund their loan unless it's done. So something to be weary of or careful of when you're asking for reports and putting them in the contract. Who's going to pay for the smoke alarms, CO2 detectors, and water heater bracing? Most cases, the seller. Most cases, it should already be done when they go on the market. Now, what could be some government required point of sale inspections or reports? Or government required point of sale corrective or remedial actions? Any ideas?
Sewer lateral report.
Yeah, the sewer lateral report. That's the new
Some
one that's
counties
coming up.
already started. Some cities.
Yeah. Many cities in the peninsula require this little inspection and report. Now Morgan Hill does as well.
Mm,
So who's going to pay for that? Specified here.
seller.
In most cases, the seller, right? In most cases, the seller. Because in most cases, they're going to get ahead of it and do it as part of their pre-escrow inspections. Escrow fees, who's going to pay the escrow fees? Who pays escrow fees in Santa Clara County?
Seller.
Seller. Who pays the escrow fees in Alameda County?
Buyers.
Half. I don't remember. Half and half.
Buyers.
The only place half and half that I know of is Southern California. They typically do the half and half. Here, Santa Clara County, sellers pay. Alameda, Contra Costa, San Mateo County, the buyer pays. So it sucks to sell your house in Santa Clara County and then buy one in Alameda County or San Mateo County. You got to pay double the closing costs. But whoever pays, you know, they're going to specify who the escrow holder is. Now, in some cases, even in Alameda and San Mateo counties, you know, the seller will open up and order a prelim. Is the buyer obligated to use that company? No. Buyer's not obligated. However, if you're competing with multiple offers, you want to do anything to rock the boat, might make sense just to have to work with whoever the seller picks. All right, who pays the owner's title insurance? The same person pays the escrow fees. If there's a lender on the buyer's side, the title insurance to cover the lender is always on the buyer. Now, what about transfer taxes? Who pays the transfer taxes in Santa Clara County? The county transfer taxes, who pays those?
So seller paid.
Seller.
Seller paid.
Seller pays, that's right. Santa Clara
Yeah.
County, the seller pays. Alameda County,
Buyer.
buyer pays. Yep.
Mm.
Sure. And city transfer taxes are typically split. 50-50.
Typically seller,
In-
but there are 3 cities paid
Yeah.
by the.
So in the city of San Francisco,
Mm.
who pays the transfer taxes? Oh.
Mm.
Care to guess?
Oh, the cheat sheet.
There's actually a nice cheat sheet that's available for most title companies. Let's see if I have one in mind.
Yeah, there's a cheat sheet.
Customary closing costs. If you, do you guys see my closing cost cheat sheet? Did it come up? Change it to cheat sheet, where are you? There it is. All right.
Buyer. The buyer.
All right, San Francisco, the buyers pay the escrow and title fees,
Yeah, buyer.
county
paid.
transfer taxes, city transfer taxes, the seller pays.
Mm. Okay.
And they're pretty significant, guys. It's pretty significant in the city of San Francisco, also in the city of Oakland. which is Alameda County. But if you look, City of Oakland has $10 per thousand up to 300,000, 15, 17, 25 bucks if you're over 5 million. So it's pretty significant. Alameda County, it's 50-50. Seller pays a county tax. So refer to the chart. Typically good to go by what is customary in the county that you're working with. Also, HOA fees, typically for preparing the disclosures, the seller pays. If they're required to cert, the buyer pays for that. That's usually mandated by the lender. And if there's any transfer fees, usually the seller pays those, or I usually check the box for the seller. Private transfer fees are not very common. And there's a couple of blank spaces for your own fees or costs. Then we have the home warranty. Always a good idea, in my opinion, to have a home warranty. Cringe a little bit sometimes with the amount of transactions we do without home warranties, but nevertheless, in many cases, the home warranty, if you're doing a proper disclosure job, they will cover your E&O deductible in the event that you get a claim for errors and omissions if your client goes after you. So it could be a hedge in your business to make sure that there is a home warranty on every house you transfer. I don't sell a house without a home warranty. If everyone refuses to pay for it, I don't mind paying for it. I'm not giving any other rebates though. But either way, I'd rather put out $500 to make sure I don't have to put out 5,000 later. Remember, we sell old homes. Likelihood of something going wrong or breaking, pretty high actually, especially after the buyer moves in the first year. And if it's something that's significant, rest assured that they're going to come to you with their hand out either way. If you have a home warranty in place, it'll solve the problem for $80. Right. All right, other terms and conditions. This is where you can write in whatever you need to write in. Again, try to keep things very, very simple in this section. Unless you're an attorney, avoid writing in other terms. The most common one here would be if you are crediting the buyer any commission, to disclose that obviously to the lender. You can put that here in the other terms. That would suffice to disclosing to the lender. Outside of that, really don't like to see things in other terms. Any questions on anything in this paragraph 3, on anything in this chart? The good news is, after going through these first 3 pages of the contract, there's pretty much nothing else for you to fill out in this contract. But that can also be a little dangerous. Don't ignore the other 13 pages. They're not there for the fun of it. Right? They're typically there explaining what's outlined in this paragraph 3. Paragraph 4 is property addenda and advisories. Any other advisories that we need to attach to this contract? Situational. If you're in a probate situation, there's a probate addendum. If you're working with the mobile home, there's an addendum, manufactured home purchase addendum. Tenant occupied property, there's the TOPA. Even if the tenants are moving out, they should still fill out the TOPA. If you're working with, now we don't have tenancy in common so much in outside of San Francisco and Oakland, but San Francisco and Oakland, more than half the condos on the market are tenancy in common situations, which means that it's really a duplex. You have 2 different owners sharing one title to the property. So those could get a little tricky. Make sure you have that addendum. Make sure everyone understands exactly what they're buying. Some challenges with financing with those as well. Same with stock cooperative purchase agreements. You guys know what a stock co-op is? A stock co-op, actually there's one in Santa Clara on Benton. It's a condominium typically, or townhouse complex, where nobody really owns the land. There's a corporation that owns the property, and every owner gets shares in this corporation with the right to occupy a specific unit. Definitely tax implications because you don't necessarily really own land. Those stock co-ops. Again, more common in big cities. More common in big cities where you have like a big building. There may be interview processes and whatnot that the buyer has to go through in order to accept it into the stock co-op. It's not quite the same. Certain fair housing things might not work the same way. Other addenda. You can create an addendum, make it part of the contract. Again, the addendum form that's blank, unless you're an attorney, try not to write in too many terms and conditions. Might backfire on you. If you're a backup offer addendum, this is a backup offer, you notify that there. There's a septic well, property monument, and propane addendum. If there's a septic system, there is an addendum that addresses how that septic system transfers. They want to get it cleaned out. The new buyer. I could tell a joke, but it'll be tasteless. If there's court confirmation, short sale, if there's a seller, if the seller is going to exchange the property, you need to disclose that. Or if the buyer is working from an exchange, you need to disclose that. Typically, there's no cost to the other side, but because of the technicalities of how the money is transferred back and forth, it needs to be disclosed if there is going to be an exchange. Some buyer and seller advisories automatically included, right? We saw them in the beginning of the contract, the buyer inspection advisory, wire fraud advisory, fair housing advisory, and the California Consumer Privacy Act advisory. They're all part of this contract already. Other things like the statewide buyer and seller advisory, you all would know is part of our mandatory disclosures that we need to have for every contract. You don't have to check the box. Whether you check the box or not, you still need to provide the form. Short sale information and advisory, hopefully we'll never have to work in that environment again. But you never know. If the economy takes a giant tank, we could be back in short sale mode. Although I highly doubt it. Highly, highly doubt it. Simply because most of our run up now has been fueled by real cash. So we're just going to have to take their losses. And I don't think they'll be very significant in the long term. And with the REO advisory, everyone knows REO is. REO is real estate owned by a lender. And the probate advisory if there's a probate. Lenders in probate situations, they're exempt from providing certain disclosures because you can't reasonably expect a lender to know anything about the property they just foreclosed on. They don't know about the property condition or any modifications the previous seller may have made. So those properties are exempt, and those exemptions are all described in those advisories. Part 5, additional terms affecting the purchase price. The buyer represents that funds will be good when deposited with the escrow holder. Definitely don't write checks that'll bounce. There's consequences to that. But in most cases, when they deposit the money in the escrow holder, these days is done by wire transfer. They do accept personal checks for the earnest money deposit. But for increased deposit or the balance of the down payment, needs to be either wired or cashier's check. Increased deposit specified in 3.2D is to be delivered in escrow holder in the same manner as the initial deposit. So if it was wired, it should be wired again. If the parties agreed to liquidated damages in this agreement, they also agreed to incorporate the increased deposit into the liquidated damages amount by signing a new liquidated damages clause at the time of the increased deposit is delivered to the escrow holder. Liquidated damages, guys, make sure you understand what that is. In the event the buyer defaults, liquidated damages is what the seller's recourse is, no more. And it's limited to 3% by law. Why is this important? Because if you don't have liquidated damages as part of the contract and the buyer defaults, the seller has the ability to sue them for damages. And there is no limit to what they can sue for if without liquidated damage. They have to prove that they're damaged, of course. They have to prove that they paid a loss, but there's no limit. So in the event we're in a declining market, you don't initial liquidated damages, there's no contingencies, buyer defaults, the property's now $100,000, $200,000 less valuable. The seller can then go after that buyer for that money. So I highly, highly recommend liquidated damages on every contract. Make sure that initials, the box is initialed by your clients. Be careful if you're working with DocuSign electronic signatures, because they will make the initials for liquidated damages and arbitration optional. And if they're optional, it's very easy for the buyer signing the documents to overlook and not initial them. The system will allow them to complete the signing without initialing. So make sure you talk about that with your clients. They have an understanding that they want liquidated damages as part of the contract, and then make it a mandatory initial when you're filling out the DocuSign, making sure that they do. Okay. All right, retention of deposit in paragraph 29, if initialed by all parties or otherwise incorporated into the agreement, specifies a remedy for buyer's default. Buyer and seller are advised to consult with a qualified California real estate attorney before adding any other clauses specifying a remedy, such as release or forfeiture of deposit or making a deposit non-refundable for failure of buyer to complete the purchase. Any such clause shall be deemed invalid unless the clause independently satisfies the statutory liquidated damages requirements set forth in the Civil Code. Again, it says it clearly here, guys, unless you're a lawyer, don't write in terms. Unless you're a lawyer, don't write in terms. All cash offers. If an all cash offer is specified in 3A, no loan is needed to purchase the property. This agreement is not contingent on buyer obtaining a loan. Buyer shall, within the time specified in the paragraph, deliver written verification of funds sufficient for the purchase price and closing costs. So we have to show them the money. Specify that in the contract. Loans, first loan will be provided for conventional financing unless you check the box. This kind of sounds repetitive, guys, because remember, everything was defined in paragraph 3. All the subsequent paragraphs are explanations for the terms in those paragraphs. Buyer loan status. Right here it says the buyer authorized the seller and the seller's authorized agent to contact the buyer's lender to determine the status of any buyer's loan specified in 3E or any alternate loan buyer pursues, whether or not a contingency of this agreement. If the contact information for buyer's lender is different from that provided under the terms of paragraph 6B, buyer shall deliver the updated contact information within 1 day of seller's request. You guys understand what that means? It means as the listing agent, you have every right to call the lender and validate the terms of the loan, validate the buyer's qualifications. So if a lender gives you any flack for saying, oh, we can't give you the information, we can't tell you what the buyer's credit rating is, so forth and so on, that's absolutely false. By contract, they have given you the authorization to contact their lender and interrogate them and get the information you need to satisfy your seller and give them peace of mind that, yeah, this person's really qualified. Yes, they have good credit. And yes, the likelihood of this loan closing is very high, or vice versa, right? That's a good question that I asked the lender. Hey, what's the buyer's credit score? If they don't tell me what the credit score is, they tell me that they never even ran their credit. Right? So I know that there's hungry lenders out there. I know that many of them will write letters to satisfy a buyer that may not be fully qualified or underwritten. It's our job as listing agents to vet them. Make sure that we're not taking a property off the market for the benefit of a buyer that can't close escrow. It's part of our job. FHA VA, if FHA or VA is checked in paragraph 3E, a FHA VA mandatory clause shall be incorporated and signed by all parties. FHA VA is not very common in our area because the prices exceed most FHA or VA loan limits. But again, if you're transacting in the Central Valley or somewhere else, other parts of the state, they definitely are. So make sure that you're aware that FHA and VA may have some issues with the property condition. And those appraisers will validate the condition of the property. All right, balance of purchase price, down payment to be deposited escrow holder pursuant to the instructions. E is limits on credit to the buyer. Any credit to the buyer is specified in paragraph 3G1 or otherwise agreed from any source for closing or other costs that is agreed to by the parties, contractual credit, shall be disclosed to the buyer's lender, if any, and made at close of escrow. If the total credit allowed by buyer's lender is less than the contractual credit, then the contractual credit from seller shall be reduced to the lender allowable credit, and in the absence of separate written agreement between the parties, there shall be no automatic adjustments to the purchase price to make up for the difference between the contractual credit and the lender allowable credit. Are we clear on this? Because a lot of times we do get credits, buyers looking for credits, and we'll see that more as this market shifts. Prior to 2008, this was actually huge. People were crediting left and right. Like real money, $30,000, $40,000 to make repairs or remodeling. And then they never made the repairs or remodelings. And then they defaulted on their loans. The bank is now stuck paying for remodelings because they financed it in their purchase price, right? They've got the cash back as a credit, never did the repair. Now the bank is stuck with a bad house, it's overextended, and they're losing exponentially more money. They killed that in 2008. Typically now the loan limit credit for the buyer to maybe 3%, I believe, 3 to 6% at the most of the purchase price. And it's only to offset closing costs. So again, if those offsets of closing costs, if the credit is higher than the offset of closing costs, you don't have something written to resolve that difference, then the money just goes back to the seller. So
Oh,
make sure you
Mark.
guys understand that. Yes.
So the seller credit can also be used to buy coins.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Just make sure that, because buying the points are absolutely a non-recurring closing cost. That's the points are by definition non-recurring closing cost. So if you have a situation where you would like to have a high dollar credit amount and you're using it to buy down points, just make sure it's within what the lender allows. 3 to 6% is typical. More than 6%, they won't. But 3% is fairly common as allowable. Additional financing terms, verification of down payment and closing costs. Buyers have to provide written verification of buyer's down payment and closing costs within the time specified, made by the buyer, buyer's lender, or loan broker. Verification of loan applications, the buyer shall deliver to the seller within the time specified a letter from the buyer's lender or loan broker stating that based on review of the written application and credit report, buyer is pre-qualified or pre-approved for the loan. If any loan specified in paragraph 3 is an adjustable rate loan, that pre-qualification or pre-approval letter shall be based on the qualifying rate, not the initial loan rate. Again, most of the time we're providing this out front with our offers. The seller's buyer stated financing. The seller is relying on the buyer's representation of the type of financing specified, including but not limited to, as applicable, all cash, amount of down payment, or contingent or non-contingent loan. Seller has agreed to a specific closing date, purchase price, and to sell to buyer in reliance on buyer's specified financing. Buyer shall pursue the financing specified in this agreement, even if buyer also elects to pursue an alternative form of financing. Seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's effort to obtain any financing other than that specified in this agreement, but shall not interfere with closing at the purchase price on the close of escrow date, even if based upon alternate financing. Buyer's inability to obtain alternate financing does not excuse buyer from the obligation to purchase the property and close escrow as specified in this agreement. What's common in this is where a buyer will, on the contract, write that it's cash. They'll show the cash. However, they still want to get a loan because they want to take advantage of tax benefits, so forth and so on, or they don't want to, at the end of the day, spend all their cash. But they show the cash to get the seller to agree to take their offer. Nothing wrong with this, as long as you close escrow on the date that you say you will. As long as you close escrow on the date. There is no guarantee that a seller will grant an extension. And you are risking, if they are taking this route, right? If not closing on time, the seller can kick them out of contract and keep their deposit. Be very, very careful if that's something that the buyer is pursuing. In any case, if they have the cash, they should just close escrow and then refinance. They can finance property anytime. Questions? You guys understand that? Just want to make sure because it's something that happens more often than not. Okay. Closing in possession, occupancy. I think we're going to probably go a little faster through the rest of this, guys. If you have specific questions on any portions of this, because we have what? Oh, about another 10 pages to get through and only about another hour to do. I'm not going to go word for word anymore. I do want to go on that portion because that one's important. Some of these we're going to glance over a little faster. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to stop me. Okay. Closing in possession for occupancy. You want to make sure that the buyer, if they're intending to occupy the property or not occupy the property, make sure you check that box accurately. The lenders will verify. You don't want to be accused of lender fraud. The condition of the property at closing. I am going to read this one because this one's important. Unless otherwise agreed, the property shall be delivered as is in its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. The property, including pool, spa, landscaping, and grounds, is to be maintained in substantially the same condition as on the date of acceptance. And all debris and personal property not included in the sale shall be removed by close of escrow or at the time possession is delivered to buyer, if not on the same date. If items are not removed when possession is delivered to buyer, all items shall be deemed abandoned. Buyer, after first delivering to seller written notice to remove the items within 3 days, may pay to have such items removed or disposed of, and may bring legal action as per this agreement to receive reasonable costs from the seller. Buyer is strongly advised to conduct investigations of the entire property in order to determine its present condition. Seller and agent may not be aware of all defects affecting the property or other factors that buyer considers important. Property improvements may not be built according to code in compliance with current law or have had all required permits issued and or finalized. Why is this one very important? Lots of times the sellers, especially if they're not occupying the property anymore, may stop watering the lawn. They may stop running the pool filter because it costs money to run it. Make sure they don't do this, because at close of escrow, If that lawn was green when the offer was made, and at close of escrow, that lawn is brown and dead, guess who's paying for a new lawn for the buyer? Same with the pool. If they don't run the filter for a month and the crystal clear, refreshing pool is now green and disgusting, it could be a $10,000, $15,000 repair, right? All this to save a couple of $100 for running the filter and the electric bill. Make sure that the sellers understand they must maintain the property in its current condition. This also means that all the appliances and everything needs to be working the same way. So if you're looking at the transfer disclosure statement and it says, yeah, all appliances work, and then when you go to verify the property condition and the appliance doesn't work, the seller is obligated to make repairs or replace those appliances. So make sure they're accurately reflecting the condition of everything when they're filling out their disclosures. Actually, I'm having a class on this, 1 to 3 at Silicon City. If you're unclear about disclosures and AVIDs, please come to that class. Any questions on this? This
Question?
also means if an appliance, yeah, I've mentioned an appliance breaking. If the sewer lateral blows up before close of escrow, seller has to pay for it. That is what it is. Please, question.
Oh, Mark?
Yeah.
This is Yvonne. I have a question. So for example, in the case of a pole-based sale, where the seller does not fill out what is the seller questionnaire and the TDS, so then they don't know if the appliance is working. So are they exempt from that?
Yes, they are exempt.
Okay.
But you have inspections, and if the inspection says it's working, then it should be working when it closes escrow.
So if the
It doesn't relieve them of their obligation to maintain the property, because although they're exempt from providing a TDS, when the buyer goes and makes the offer, if the pool is clear and the grass is green, it better stay clear and stay green at close of escrow. Just because they're exempt from the TDS does not excuse them from maintaining the property.
But sometimes your inspector will not run a cycle on a washer and dryer. So how do you
Yeah,
know?
they don't.
Like,
They don't.
yeah. So and then they don't have a TDS and say it's working. So
Right. Well, hopefully you're getting a good price, because in those cases you are.
so that's why home warranty.
Bingo.
That's true.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
That way, if something breaks, right, it's a lot easier to pay $80 and make the client happy, or even from the client's perspective, just to pay $80 to fix it, as opposed to if they're fixed, if they're being faced with $1,000 or a $5,000 bill, then they're really going to be upset and seek remedy. Right, again, buyers strongly advised to conduct investigations of the entire property in order to determine its present condition. All right. Seller remaining in possession after close of escrow. If the seller has the right to stay in there, pursuant to paragraph 33M2, right, you have to make sure that you keep the insurance on the property. Homeowner's insurance can only cover if you're a homeowner. Once you sell the property, you are no longer the homeowner. However, you may still be in possession of the property. So you no longer have homeowner's insurance. You're now a renter. Make sure that if you want, if their personal items are important to that client, make sure they have the right insurance and change from a homeowner's to a renter policy to cover their personal belongings. There should be a homeowner fire policy in place from the buyer, because once they take ownership of the home, they have the insurable interest and their homeowner's insurance. Especially if they have a loan, they're going to have homeowner insurance. right? At the close of escrow, the seller assigns to buyer any assignable warranty rights for any items that are left behind. The seller will deliver to the buyer available copies of any warranties, but it's not our job. Agents cannot and will not determine the assignability of any warranties. It's beyond the scope of what we do. In most cases, most appliances are beyond their warranty period, hence the home warranty, which will kick in and cover. Even if the seller stays in possession of the home, they still need to provide keys, passwords, and codes, or means to operate all locks, mailboxes, everything to the buyer. The buyer is now the owner of that home and has the right to access that home for what they deem necessary. The seller, as a tenant, has the right to quiet enjoyment, of course. But if there's a situation, maybe buyer needs to make a repair or needs to make some type of investigation, they have to give notice, but then they should be able to access the property. All right. Paragraph 8 with contingencies and removal of contingencies. Loan contingency. Unless otherwise specified or attached to their contingency removal, is contingent upon the buyer obtaining the loan specified. Buyer shall act diligently in good faith to obtain the designated loans. If there's no appraisal contingency or the appraisal contingency has been waived or removed, the failure of the property to appraise at the purchase price does not entitle buyer to exercise the cancellation right pursuant to the loan contingency. If buyer is otherwise qualified for the specified loan and buyer is able to satisfy lender's non-appraisal conditions for closing the loan. You guys understand that? If they waive the appraisal contingency and still have a loan contingency, if it doesn't appraise, they're still on the hook. That's what that means. Especially if the buyer can co-qualify, right? And you can't tank your own loan. Like the buyer can't go out and buy a car and purposely kill his credit and disqualify him for the loan. This will not sit well with the contingency arbitrator. You have to act in good faith, which means you're doing everything possible to satisfy the condition of this contract. All right, buyers advised to investigate insurability of the property as early as possible. There are questions on the TDS about insurance claims and SPQ if there's any insurance claims. Make sure those are answered honestly. They don't necessarily run flu reports. Sometimes they do. Flu report is a history of insurance claims. If there's a property that has multiple claims, it may be difficult to insure. So be careful of that. Buyer's contractual obligations with regard to deposit, balance of down payment, and closing costs are not contingencies of this agreement unless otherwise agreed, which means that they have to have the money to move forward. If there's an appraisal contingency, removing the loan contingency is not removing the appraisal contingency. They're two independent things. And if there's no loan contingency, then obtaining any loan is not a contingency of the agreement. If the buyer does obtain the loan specified and as a result unable to purchase the property, seller may be entitled to the buyer's deposit. Yep. So again, if the seller is saying that, oh, I'm going to go for a specific type of loan, it's not working out, and they have to delay, or they say that they're buying cash, now they're going for a loan, the seller doesn't have to grant them any extensions. They could legally keep their deposit. Appraisal, if there's an appraisal contingency and you want to back out of the contingency, you do have to show the appraisal to the seller to validate. If there's no appraisal contingency, you can't use the loan contingency to back out. So if you waive the appraisal contingency, loan qualifies, you could be on the hook for the deposit. Right, investigation of the property. If the agreement is specified, contingent upon the buyer's acceptance of the condition. Buyer has the right to investigate the property if they remove that contingency. Well, they're agreeing to the condition of the property as is. and they have time to review the seller's documents. Again, we'll get to this part in a second. Title, the agreement is specified contingent upon buyer's ability to obtain a title insurance policy for the property. You got to review the current preliminary report and make sure that items are disclosed or observable, even if not on record or not specified in the preliminary report. What does a prelim tell us, guys? It tells us who owns the property, make sure that they have the legal right to sell it. But remember that prelim also describes the property. It also notifies of any encroachments or easements. So you have to make sure that your clients are okay with this, right? If there's big power lines in the backyard, you know, there's most likely an easement for the power company to be able to go onto their property and service those lines. Make sure they're okay with that. No, maybe not. The common plan development disclosures, if applicable. You have time for the buyer to review the common interest disclosures, which are HOA documents and CCNRs. Also, buyer has time, ability to review the leased or lien items. There's a contingency for that if there's solar panels, water filtration systems sometimes, even septic systems sometimes, propane systems. Paragraph H, removal or waiver of contingencies with the offer. The buyer shall have no obligation to remove a contractual contingency unless the seller has provided all required documents, reports, disclosures, and information pertaining to that contingency. So for example, if the seller does not provide you the contingency documents, you place, oh, I need 5 days for inspection for this contingency. If those 5 days pass and the seller still has not provided these documents, they cannot force you to remove the contingency. They cannot send you a notice to perform to remove the contingency. If the buyer does remove a contingency without first receiving all required information from the seller, the buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights that apply to that contingency. If the buyer removes or waives any contingencies without an adequate understanding of the property's condition or buyer's ability to purchase, the buyer is acting against the advice of the agent. It's kind of funny because in most cases, we're the ones telling them they have to remove the contingencies in order to even have their offer considered, right? Although, be very, very careful with this, guys. If you don't have the TDS, the SPQ, even professional inspections. This is a significant difference from the previous contract. Significant difference, because in the previous contract, once the buyer was presented with new information, they would automatically get 3 days of contingency to validate that information or back out if they don't like what's written in that paperwork. That is now out the window, this new contract. Okay. Removal of contingency or cancellation. For any contingency specified, the buyer shall, within the applicable period, remove the contingency or cancel. If they don't remove the contingency and they have all the documents in order to do so, the seller can force the cancellation, but they must first give the buyer a notice to perform. If the buyer does not perform after being given the notice, then the seller can cancel the agreement. If it's a sale of buyer's property, the agreement and buyer's ability to obtain financing are not contingent upon the sale of any property owned by the buyer unless they ask for that contingency. Items included and excluded. Remember, we were checking boxes in the chart there, but it goes beyond that to this section here. All right, the items listed as included or excluded in the MLS, flyers, marketing materials, or disclosures are not included in the purchase price or excluded from sale unless specified in this paragraph or paragraph 3P or as otherwise agreed. Any items included herein are components of the home and are not intended to affect the price. All items are transferred without seller warranty. Be careful with your stagers furniture. make sure that you don't sell it with the house. Right, sometimes a stager comes in and puts window coverings and things of that nature. If that's the case, make sure that those are excluded in the contract. Right, items included in the sale are all existing fixtures and fittings that are attached to the property. So if the refrigerator is built in the kitchen, like a Sub-Zero, where it's customly built in, or it's part of the kitchen cabinets, some higher end refrigerators are hidden as kitchen cabinets. They're awesome, but they are what they are. If you don't check the box, they're still included because they're attached to the property. Also be careful with those high-end TVs and brackets, right? They could be argued as attached to the property. If the seller is attached to those items as the listing side, you want to make sure that you exclude those in your documentation as well as in the contract. But existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing and heating fixtures, ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs, grates, solar power systems, built-in appliances and appliances for which special awnings, openings or encasements have been made, window and door screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings, which includes blinds, curtains, draperies, shutters, or any other materials that cover any portion of the window. So again, guys, if your stager is bringing in window coverings, unless they're going to let those things go, make sure that you write in there that staging is not part of the sale. Attached floor coverings, television antennas, satellite dishes, air coolers, air conditioners, pool or spa equipment, garage door openers, remote controls, mailboxes, in-ground landscaping, water features and fountains, water softeners, water purifiers, light bulbs, including smart bulbs, and all items specified in paragraph 3P, if current existing at the time of acceptance, right? So if there are no light bulbs, you don't have to put them in. But if there's working light bulbs, they all have to stay and be there. I had one instance where she did light bulbs. She took everything she could. It was incredible. All right. So again, if the seller does not intend to include any items specified as being included because it's not owned by the seller, whether placed on the property by agent or stager or third party, items should be listed as being excluded in paragraph 3P or excluded by seller in a counter offer. So yeah, again, don't sell your stager's equipment. They may not be happy with you. They may actually come after you for damages, so be careful with that. All right, same with security systems. Anything that's really there, hardwired into the house, stays with the house. Leased or lien items and systems, seller within the time specified is going to disclose to the buyer if any such systems or otherwise is included in the sale is leased or not owned by the seller, or is subject to any maintenance or other ongoing financial obligation, or specifically subject to a lien or other encumbrance or loan. It should be delivered by or all written materials concerning any such item. So basically, they have to disclose anything that's going to cost the buyer money over time. Seller represents that all items included in the purchase price, unless agreed, are owned by the seller and shall be transferred free and clear of liens and encumbrances, except the items and systems identified pursuant to paragraph 96 or transfer without seller warranty. So guys, make sure that you adequately document, especially those solar systems, right? If you're not transferring the lease as part of the contract and you forget about it, well, at the end of the day, the seller needs to transfer those solar panels free and clear of any liens, which means they're going to have to pay those off. Make sure they're aware of this. You never want your clients to be blindsided by 4 or 5 figure bills. They will not be happy with you if they do. Right? The seller may have thought, oh, I pay $300 a month for this solar system, and we'll just transfer to the buyer, but they didn't properly write that into the contract. Well, they're going to have to pay off that lease in order to transfer the property. It's not a good situation to be in, especially for you as the agent that wrote the contract, or as the listing agent that accepted such an offer. Right, items excluded from sale unless otherwise agreed. The following items are excluded from sale. All items specified in 3P2, of course. Audio and video components such as flat screen TV speakers and other items if any such item is not itself attached to the property. Even if a bracket or other mechanism is attached to the component or item is attached to the property. Furniture and other items secured to the property for earthquake or safety purposes, unless otherwise specified in 3P1, brackets attached to walls, floors, or ceilings of any such component. Furniture or other item will be removed and holes or other damage shall be repaired, but not painted. So by default, everything should be taken out, including the brackets. Right, sometimes we don't see what's behind those televisions, right? Those brackets are going to be in there. Make sure that when they take them, they don't leave big holes behind. That's not okay. Right, the allocation of costs, right? The paragraphs will determine who pays for what. We check the boxes in paragraph 3. This describes the government requirements and corrective or remedial actions with legally required installations and property improvements. Smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and strapping that water heater. Got to make sure that those are in compliance with the law. Any other point of sale requirements, such as sewer laterals, maybe the 3H report in San Francisco, any other types of government inspection or point of sale requirement is outlined in that paragraph 3Q and 3N. Typically, the seller makes sure that those items are taken care of. If they need to be re-inspected, lender requires an additional inspection be made, seller shall be responsible for any corresponding re-inspection fee. If buyer incurs costs to comply with lender requirements concerning this item, seller shall be responsible for those costs. So basically, if the seller says the water heater is in compliance, the guy goes out and says, no, it's not. Then the seller makes it in compliance and has to pay for the guy to come back out and verify. Right, the buyer and seller are advised to seek information from a knowledgeable source regarding local and state mandates, whether they are point of sale requirements or requirements of ownership. Agents do not have expertise in this area and cannot ascertain all requirements or cost of compliance. All right, we're not sewer lateral inspectors. We're not expected to be. Make sure the right people are doing their job. Any questions? Concerns? Home warranty is pretty self-explanatory. Even if you don't specify a home warranty or the seller to pay for the home warranty, the buyer can still has the right to buy a home warranty. And by the way, guys, home warranties can be purchased on any property at any time. It doesn't have to be in the matter of a sale. So if the buyer didn't buy one, but they want to buy one in a couple of months, they can. Or if the buyer didn't buy one and one or two things start to break and they're worried, they can buy one for anything further down the road. You can do it at any time. I highly recommend, if your HVAC systems are older than 15 years, especially, you should have a home warranty, because the likelihood of them failing after 15 years is pretty high. And a lot of them, you know, they still work. They could work for 20 to 25 years. So if the systems are old, especially if the systems are old, make sure that a home warranty is in place. Okay. Any questions? Y'all still awake?
Mark,
Yes.
question. And you say the home warranty, how much should buy? Is it more appropriate from your experience?
What is the cost of the home warranty?
Yeah,
what your question is?
you buy, yeah. So like 500 or
550.
Yeah, it's between $500 and $750, depending on the size of the home and what systems you want to have covered.
500 to 750. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Mark,
Yes.
earlier you mentioned about the appraisal contingency and the loan contingency. I think I messed up that part. Like, even if you have a appraisal contingency, but without loan contingency, if the loan got approved, you still unhook of the transaction, right? Can you?
If you, wait, can you repeat that one more time?
So I think that there's one item like about appraisal contingency and a loan contingency. So if you only choose one, for example, if you only have appraisal contingency but without loan contingency, if the loan fail or something, you still unhook. I think I missed that part. Which one?
Yeah, so they're independent. They're independent of another, right?
Okay.
So if you you can have an appraisal contingency and no loan contingency, but then if it appraises, then you have to go forward. Even if you can't get the loan, you could lose your deposit.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see.
They're two separate contingencies. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can waive the appraisal and still have a loan. If the house doesn't appraise, but you still qualify for the loan,
Mm-hmm.
you're still on the hook, or your deposit's on the hook. For that.
Got it.
Mark, about that, besides the loan contingency and appraisal contingency, I think on the previous item you mentioned, seller didn't provide the document within certain day, buyer can cancel it.
Well, the seller has to provide documents. It's
Yeah,
specified in the contract how many, by default it's 7 days, they have to give you everything. But you can tie that down to a shorter time, or in many cases, they give it to you up front. So you have everything.
So is there besides that, any chance buyer can cancel the contract?
If they have a
Other-
contingency or no contingency.
No contingency.
If they have no contingency, well, they can cancel the contract, but they'll lose the deposit.
But if they don't buyer regret, he made an offer, so
Yeah,
there's
that's
no
like-
chance. There's no chance for them to cancel.
Well, they don't have to, I mean, they just walk away from the deposit. Sometimes
walk
it's
away with
better
the
to walk away
deposit.
from 50,000 than spend 3 million and be unhappy, right? You don't know.
Yeah, but they don't want to.
Nobody likes to lose money.
Yeah, lose the money. So
Nobody
there's no
likes to lose
other-
money. So
Right.
then what happens is you negotiate. You negotiate. You have to negotiate. You have to find your leverage. What is your leverage? And see if you can get a favorable result. Now, if you removed all your contingencies, are you going to get your whole deposit back? Probably not. But are you assured that you're going to lose the whole deposit? Well, that's not necessarily the case either. Right? In order to hook the whole deposit, the seller may have to go through a process that they're not comfortable with, or may not want to wait to where the buyer may offer to, I'll just give you half, make it easy, I'll sign it over now, and then we go away. And then you don't have to worry about suing me. You don't have to worry about other items that can make it extend or make it unpleasant. And in many cases, they have an agreement. Also, there is no agreement or no rule of law that says that you have to resolve the issue right away. So if the buyer definitely wants to cancel, but their deposit is in the air, they would like some back, they're not necessarily entitled to some back. The seller may say, if the market's going up, we'll try to resell it. If we get more, we'll give you your money back. Right? If we get less, though, then probably won't, or we'll keep some. So there is
Depends on the market condition.
There is an ability. I'll put it this way: there's an ability to negotiate. There's an ability to negotiate, but there's no guarantee. Once those contingencies are removed, that you're going to get any money back as the buyer. Now, as your good agent, as your friend or agent that's representing you, I will fight for you. I will try to get it back. We can ask. We can try to negotiate, but there is no guarantee. The seller could be butthurt, offended, and realize, took my house off the market for these people. We lost out on 4 other buyers. Now the next buyers are coming at $200,000 less. Yeah, I'm keeping them. Be that way.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
when your buyer's making the offer, if they're removing their contingencies, they're removing their regrets.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? But yeah, it happens sometimes. Fairly happens every now and then. The buyer has the regret and say cancel, they try to get their money back. All right. Moving on to statutory and other disclosures and cancellation rights. Right, the TDS, NHD, and other statutory and supplemental disclosures, the seller has the time specified to give those documents to the buyer for their inspection and review. The TDS is required unless the seller is exempt. Let's read part 2. The real estate transfer disclosure statement required by this paragraph is considered fully completed if the seller has completed the section titled coordination with other disclosure forms by checking a box. And seller has completed and answered all questions and signed the seller's information section, section 2, and the seller's agent, if any, has completed and signed the seller's agent section 3, or if applicable, agent's visual inspection disclosure. Section 5, acknowledgement of receipt of a copy of the TDS shall be signed after all previous sections, if applicable, have been completed. Nothing stated herein relieves a buyer's agent, if any, from the obligation to 1, conduct a reasonable, competent, and diligent visual inspection of the accessible areas of the property and disclosed in section 4 of the TDS or an AVID material facts affecting the value or desirability of the property that were or should have been revealed by such an inspection. Or 2, complete any sections on all disclosures required to be completed by the buyer's agent. Make sure that we actually do an AVID, guys. This is something I'll be stressing in my later from 1 to 3. The AVID is your testament, basically, or testimony to your fiduciary duty to your clients. If you don't take it seriously and you don't complete it thoroughly, in the event something goes sideways, in the event that your fiduciary duty is in question, the first thing they look at is, well, what was the agent's contribution to the disclosures? Did they do their job? Did they go through the house and apply their eyes to what they see, right? So when you're completing the AVID, make sure that you have comments, first of all, in every box. There should be no reason for an NA. There's always something to disclose. You see something when you walk into a room, right? There's either cracks in the wall or the place was recently painted, one of the two. Live in California, guys. Right? I would challenge you to find a house that hasn't been painted in the last 5 years that doesn't have some kind of crack in the driveway. Okay, so on almost every line, either there's fresh paint or there's cracks in the wall. Look at the floors. If there's carpets, unless they're brand new, if they're brand new, you write that down. There's brand new carpet. Right? You want to disclose if it's new paint because new paint can hide defects. New paint can hide old water stains, things of that nature. Obviously, we don't have to go in and thoroughly describe all the what could have beens, but we have to describe what we see. Right? And it goes through every room of the house, goes through the exterior of the house. So actually go through and do that inspection. I typically do it if I'm accompanying a home inspector or a termite inspector. That way I kind of see what's going on with the property. But unfortunately, as I'm reviewing documents, there's way too many cases of agents not taking this seriously. And it's a danger because remember, we sell old houses. Things can break at any time. And if it's a big ticket item that breaks, it could have not been your fault. You could have been the best agent, walked your client through everything, showed them everything, right? If your AVID is weak, lose. So be very thorough with that and take it seriously. Any questions on that? The other thing I want to stress on this as well with regards to TDSs and SPQs, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely never complete these for the seller. The seller must complete the TDS and the SPQ. I know sometimes we're an international office. We deal with folks that maybe English isn't their first language, so we're doing some translating if we're doing that. Nevertheless, make sure that the seller is present and sees the questions and is answering them and filling them out, and they're signing it, of course. The cleanest is to avoid using electronic signatures for these two documents, TDS and SPQ. That's the cleanest. That verifies that, yeah, for sure the seller filled it out. I know sometimes they don't, and it's a danger for the agent. You could lose your license. Someone had a question.
Oh yeah, Mark. So on the EV, do you recommend agent to put like for example, I hear noise from a call train or bark from the next door dogs? Should we put that? Okay.
Yep. Yes, you should. If you hear it and observe it, absolutely. Because what happens is if it's there, in many cases, guys, when we're working with a buyer in a multiple offer situation, they'll accept anything that's written there. They want the house pretty bad. However, if it's not written there and they move in and they find out after the fact, they're going to come to you for money. 1,000% of the time. So make sure that you do a diligent job filling that out. And I also advise my sellers, especially on those noise issues, it's better to over disclose than under disclose. Again, buyers reading them prior to making an offer, they love the property. They are looking for excuses. They're not looking for excuses not to buy. But once they move in and then they find things out after the fact, it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty for you. You're going to have to write a check. I don't want to do that. Work too hard for it. I don't want to write a check. So it's the easiest way not to write a check is just do a diligent job and be avid. And better to over disclose than under disclose. And that's how you should counsel your sellers when you're presenting them to complete a TDS and the SPQ. Mr. Seller, if you're questioning whether I should or I should not disclose something, the answer is you should disclose. You should disclose. All right, lead disclosures, if the property was built before 1978, if they're built after that, you don't have to worry about it. Fire hardening disclosure and advisory, it's part of the transaction prop packet as well. Be very careful with this as well if they're in a high fire severity zone for insurance purposes. Homeowners insurance is going up significantly, especially in areas that are fire hazard. Insurance companies don't like to lose money. And they lost a lot of money in California over wildfires. So they are now charging appropriately, especially if you're living in an area where, you know, Saratoga Hills, Los Gatos Hills, things of that nature. Insurance is expensive now. All right. Waivers of statutory lead and other disclosures in paragraph 11A, B, C, and D are prohibited by law. So you can't waive those. We're on paragraph 11, by the way, I do believe, right? Yeah. So return of signed copies, the buyer shall within the time specified or 5 days after delivery of any disclosures, sign them and return them back. And within 3 days of everyone signing and returning everything back, you're expected to have all those documents uploaded into Command for review. If you stick to that, you'll never have to wait for your paychecks, right? As long as you get your documents uploaded within 3 days of them signing, everything should be in command at least a week, if not 2 weeks before close of escrow, which will give me more than enough time to make sure it's adequately reviewed and accepted. And then you can get your money wired directly from escrow. Some cases, we've had agents uploading all the documents like 3 or 4 days before closing, in which case you will not be getting your wire. You'll be waiting for your check. So make sure that you upload everything as soon as everything is signed. Termination rights. Statutory or other disclosures. If any disclosure specified in A, B, C, or D, or subsequent or amended disclosure to those just specified is delivered to the buyer after the offer is signed, the buyer shall have the right to terminate this agreement within 3 days after delivery in person, or 5 days after delivery by deposit in the mail or by an electronic record or email satisfying the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, by giving written notice of rescission to seller or seller's authorized agent. If buyer does not rescind within the time period, buyer has been deemed to have approved the disclosure and shall not have the right to cancel. So it happens automatically. It happens automatically. If there's are material items that are disclosed after the fact, even after the buyer has removed their contingencies, right, they have the ability to cancel. And a lot of that is, it's if you have a TDS, you go by what is written there. If someone sends you an amended changing something, then you do have the right to terminate. And really, it's predicated on the honesty of the other side, right? If they were dishonest in their disclosure, well, yeah, sure, they may try to hold your deposit for removing contingencies, but then you can also seek legal action for their misrepresentations. So the negotiation is, well, Mr. Seller, you made a misrepresentation for which I will sue you, or you will give me my deposit back and we'll go our separate ways. What do you want to do? In which case the seller will have a decision to make. It's like, oh yeah, maybe I misled them, or, you know, I don't have a case, or based on this disclosure, yeah, they can, I am liable for certain things. Maybe it's easier just to give them their money back and try to find another buyer. So all is not lost if you remove your contingencies, of course. But we've had cases where maybe the agent forgot to sign the transfer disclosure statement. So they sign it, and then they send it to the buyer. And the buyer goes, oh, you know what? Thanks for giving this to me. Now that it's signed, I want to cancel. Yeah, that's not going to fly because all the material items have been covered. Right. Withholding taxes. Escrow holder handles it for the most part. Escrow holder handles the withholding taxes. The buyer or seller, I'm sorry, completes the FERPTA, which will basically act as instructions, whether escrow will withhold funds or will not withhold funds. If it's subject to withholding, usually they'll withhold 3% of the purchase price, and then the seller can account for it when they do their taxes. Megan's Law database disclosure, you just disclose to them in this contract where people can go to find out about any sex offenders in their neighborhoods. It's not up to us to check this. Buyer wants information, the buyer, it's up to the buyer to have an understanding of where they're buying their home. Notice regarding gas and hazardous liquid transmission pipelines. Oh, let's see. Yvonne had a question for me. For RPA, do we still need to upload this to command agency agreement between the seller and the listing agent? No, you don't. I'm going to change that in command probably the next week. So it'll be clear. We used to have to provide it because the agency disclosure is what validates the person has listing agreement, right? That's what used to validate the person had the listing agreement. You don't want to, okay, you don't want to give me the whole listing agreement so I don't see all the terms on there. That's fine. At least we send over the agency disclosure. So at least we know that you have that agency relationship. Now we're kind of assuming that to be the case. But in the past, it was a required document, right? Because lo and behold, any unscrupulous person can throw anything up on the MLS. So make sure that those people are actually in a relationship and are their agents. All right. Talked about Megan's Law, notice regarding gas and hazardous liquid transmission pipelines. Again, bigger issue in big cities. Rural areas, you probably don't have pipelines going through your property. But in the cities, they got all kinds of crap going on underneath the ground there. So make sure you're comfortable. Condominium plan development disclosures. Again, those are your CCNRs and HOA documents. Typically, when the seller signs a listing agreement, they're going to go ahead and authorize us to go ahead and order those HOA documents, make sure that we have them for the buyers to review prior to them making an offer. It's a very easy out if you have the contingency for condominium plan development. But doing this after the fact is a bad strategic move for the seller. The seller accepts the offer. If you want it to be as tight as possible, as few outs as possible. You have the ability to create that by ordering inspections up front, making sure you have your documents filled out up front, and ordering those HOA documents. So that way the buyer has them for review prior to making an offer. Right, natural and environmental hazards. Again, first thing when we open escrow is they ask for you to order the NHD. Typically we do it. Most NHD companies will only charge you if the transaction goes forward. If the transaction falls apart, they waive it. Most of them do. LGS, JCP report does. That's the biggest one. Maybe some obscure NHD company might not, so be careful if you're trying to save a few dollars. Known material facts, seller shall within the time specified disclose known material facts and defects affecting the property, including but not limited to known insurance claims within the past 5 years, or provide buyer with permission to contact the lender to get such information and make any and all other disclosures required by law. So again, if it's a question of to disclose or not to disclose, disclose. Right, the buyer's investigation of the property and matters affecting the property, the buyer has the right at the buyer's expense to conduct inspections, investigations, surveys, or anything else the buyer deems necessary to satisfy their curiosity. Right, they give some examples of what can be inspected. General home inspection, inspection for lead-based paint, inspection for wood-destroying pests and organisms. Let's read this one because it's important. Any inspection for wood-destroying pests and organisms shall be prepared by a registered SBC company. It shall cover the main building and attached structures. It may cover detached structures. Shall not include water tests of shower pans on upper level units unless the owners of property below the shower consent. Shall not include roof coverings. And if the property is a unit in a condominium or other common interest subdivision, the inspection shall include only the separate interests and any exclusive use areas being transferred. It shall not include common areas and shall include a report showing the findings of the company, which can be separated into sections for evidence of infestation or infections, which are section 1, and conditions likely to lead to infestation, which are section 2, in case you didn't know the difference. This is where it gets sticky sometimes, is detached decks or decks in the backyard, awnings in the backyard. Anytime wood is exposed to the elements, it's going to be rot. It's subject to rot and deterioration. So this kind of breaks out, what is covered in the SPC, covered by the SPC operator. So if there's, let's say, a FHA or a VA situation that requires the Section 1 clearance, if you're a diligent listing agent and you know that there's a detached deck, make sure that's not included in that inspection, because there always is dry rot in detached, unless they're brand new, and those repairs are expensive. Those repairs are expensive. When I bought my house, I kind of stuck it to the listing agent because I did have a Section 1 and I did have a detached, or I had a deck, it was attached. It was about a $20,000 bill. They signed it. I held them to it. So if you're a property manager, you should stay in your lane. Leave it down. Leave it at that. Let's see here. Without the seller's written consent, buyers shall neither make nor cause to be made invasive or destructive buyer investigations, which means that they're not going to, unless the seller agrees, they're not going to go in and open the wall and see what's behind the wall. They will note that, and you'll have the ability to do a subsequent inspection. If the buyer chooses to do a more invasive inspection, they can. If they choose not to, make sure that they sign a waiver of inspection. And the buyer shall keep the property free and clear of liens, repair all damages arising from their investigations, and indemnify and hold seller harmless for all resulting liability claims, demands, damages, and costs. Buyer shall require anyone acting on buyer's behalf to carry policies of liabilities, workers' comp, or any other applicable insurance, defending and protecting seller from liability for any injuries or person. So ultimately, guys, if you're going to have someone come and inspect, make sure they're licensed contractors and they have the proper insurance. Anyone you hire to do any work on the property, also make sure they are licensed and insured in the event something happens. All right, we're going to stop here to be respectful of time. It's noon at lunchtime. We will reschedule, most likely not tomorrow, but beginning of next month, another class to finish the rest of this document. If you guys have any questions or concerns at any time, feel free to reach out to me. It's available via email, via phone, text message, all that good stuff. And look for another contract class to complete this, more than likely beginning of next month. All right. Thank you guys for joining me today.
Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate your
Thank you, Mark.
participation.
It was great.
I know this is probably one of the driest and hardest classes to go through, and I appreciate y'all staying awake for me.
It's important.
It's useful. Yeah, it's important. Thank you.
Hopefully you got some benefit from it.
Mhm.
And
I tried.
I'll see you guys. We'll see you guys around the office.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you guys want more on inspections and disclosures, come to Silicon City at 1 o'clock
Today?
today.
Okay.
I'm going there right now.
Okay.
All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.